I've been haunted by the things I saw in Hollow Pines Wilderness. Haunted isn't even the right word. It's more like something latched onto me there, followed me home like a parasite, feeding off my memories and twisting them until I don't even trust my own thoughts anymore. It started the moment we set foot near Mirror Lake. Its surface so still it felt like looking into another world. The cliffs framed that water perfectly, the trees crowning the edge like silent guardians, but the lake seemed alive, its black depths watching us just as intently, like a lid on something too deep to measure. My friends, Mark, Liam, and Tasha, laughed as we pitched our tents, though their smiles didn't quite meet their eyes. We worked in tandem. I remember how the damp canvas felt under my hands, how the zip snapped shut with a finality I would later regret. The sun dipped low, turning the lake to a dull silver, and we joked about ghosts, laughing at the old legend of a family who disappeared here decades ago, their campsite found pristine, their fire still burning. We passed around beer cans, their metallic clangs echoing off the cliffs, and roasted sausages over a fire that crackled and spat sparks into the gathering dark. For a while, the night felt warm, safe. I noticed the way Tasha's hair glowed in the flame light, and how Liam's laughter never reached beyond the curve of his lips. I should have seen it then. Then something moved in the darkness. It was a sound at first, soft, wet steps that carried weight far beyond any deer or elk. Every footfall was deliberate, each leaf crackling under invisible pressure. My heart thudded, and I reached for my flashlight, but my hand trembled so hard I dropped it. I unzipped my tent and peered out. Between towering trunks, I saw a silhouette, impossibly tall, limbs bending at impossible angles, knotted like a malformed tree, its head tilted as if hearing us breathe. When I clicked the flashlight, the beam wavered and then the figure was gone, leaving me with nothing but the echo of my own rapid heartbeat and a growing sense of dread. In the morning, we discovered long, narrow footprints pressed into the soft pine needles around our fire pit. They curved toward the lake and simply stopped at the water's edge, as if the creature had melted into the black surface. I knelt to trace the prints with my finger. The needles were crushed flat, like they'd been dragged. The rest of our camp was untouched. No upturned gear, no snapped branches. It was too organized, too deliberate. We tried to brush it off. Mark laughed it off, blaming pranksters or a burly hunter, but I saw the worry flicker in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. Liam mumbled about hypothermic hallucinations and group delusion, but he kept checking the tree line, fingers white around the strap of his camera. Tasha struggled to keep the stove going, like her hands shaking so badly she nearly set the fuel canister alight. She stared into the woods with such intensity it felt like she expected something to emerge. As dusk fell again, the woods slid into an unnatural silence. No insects chirping, no wind whispering, just the low hiss of our fire's dying embers. We sat closer together, laughter gone. Then I heard it. A voice. So faint I thought it was the wind at first. It was a wet, rasping whisper, a sound like lungs struggling underwater. The words sliced through the quiet. She's still breathing. It said my name, my real name, drawn out in that choking tone. Something in it twisted my insides like a cold hand around my spine. Tasha's flashlight wavered in her grip as she spun toward the trees. I saw her lips move, mouthing the same curse. Panic set in. We lashed logs together to barricade the tents, piling branches and rocks around the entrances. But it didn't matter. The moment our backs were turned, the forest shifted. Trails we'd mapped out on our phones vanished. An old fallen log we used as a waypoint moved. We marked a tree with a slash of my knife. Minutes later, we found ourselves standing before it again. My compass spun like a top, a toy with no center. Every landmark betrayed us. Our supplies began to disappear. My flashlight vanished from the pouch at my belt. Mark's boots were found perfectly aligned at the water's edge. Liam's camera lay face down, lens cracked. We rationed the last scraps of food in hollow silence, listening for movement. Then, in the dim circle of our final firelight, it appeared. I glimpsed it fully for the first time, skin textured like damp bark, slick and shiny in the glow. Each joint looked sprained, knotted at impossible angles. No feet touched the ground. It hovered, limbs dragging like cruel puppets. Its face was a tangle of black tendrils, writhing as if alive, tasting the air. It stepped forward, but the pine needles didn't shift. No crackle of undergrowth, nothing. It hovered there, unnaturally still, and it whispered, "She's still breathing." Mark let out a scream that shattered the silence, but the thing didn't respond. Then, without warning, it lunged. No sound, no shred of canvas or crunch of bone, just an invisible force ripping Mark from our side. His scream cut off mid-note. Chaos exploded. Liam hurled a rock that vanished into shadows. Tasha screamed as something passed through her tent flap, and I bolted into the trees, branches tearing at my face. My lungs burned, my legs buckled, but fear gave me wings. I ran until everything blurred. Trees, stones, my own sobs. The forest seemed endless, but then I saw a ribbon of asphalt through the trees. I stumbled onto the road just before dawn, lying broken on the shoulder. My clothes were shredded, skin torn. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. The mist rose from the pavement, making the world look as unreal as the nightmares I'd hide from. Search parties scoured the woods but found nothing. No campsite, no fire pit, no footprints, only my ripped tent stakes jutting from the earth. They labeled it a tragic accident, a case of severe shock and imagination. But I know what I escaped. I know what waited in those shadows. Back home, they hailed me as a miracle survivor. News cameras filmed me clutching my returned backpack. I smiled through interviews, hugged my parents, let them think I'd gone crazy, then snapped back to sanity. But something about their expressions made my blood run cold. The way they held still, too polished, too symmetrical, like the masks they'd put on for the cameras. Sometimes I catch a flicker in their mouths, a quick whisper of black like ink. Though they urged me to move on, I was drawn back to hollow pines. It started with dreams, deep water pulling me under, ghostly hands brushing my cheek, a voice calling my name. I found myself behind the wheel again, driving those winding roads as dusk painted the sky purple. I parked at the old sign, Mirror Lake 5 miles, and walked in alone. At sunset, the lake was glass again. I stood at the edge, breathing shallowly. The last light glowed orange, then faded. The water rippled, and I saw them. 3 faces beneath the surface, caught their eyes dark hollows, skin pale. Mark's face contorted in silent anguish, Liam's mouth shaped in an endless scream, Tasha's eyes glimmering with something wild. They looked at me and mouthed my name. Then I heard it behind me. "She's still breathing." The voice rose, surrounding me. I turned, but there was no one, just the trees leaning in, branches twisting like claws. A cold pressure slid across my skin as if something slithered beneath it. It wrapped around my chest, squeezing. I tried to scream, but no sound came. "You were never meant to leave," it crooned in that guttural tone. The forest closed in, roots breaking from the ground to clutch my ankles. I was pulled toward the lake, inch by horrifying inch. My final thought as I slipped beneath the mirrored depths was of them, my friends, waiting. Their smiles spread unnaturally wide, welcoming me home. Now, if you ever see someone stumbling near Mirror Lake at dawn, bloodless, eyes empty, know that it isn't them and it isn't me. It's what we've become, shapes trapped between the pines, whispers riding the wind, chanting, still breathing, still watching, still waiting. It was supposed to be the last camping trip of the summer, just me, Darren, and Kayla. We were 17, about to start senior year, and desperate to have one more adventure before life started grinding us into something smaller and sadder. The plan was Darren's idea. He always had this talent for finding places that felt just a little too far off the map. places that didn't appear on official park guides or trail apps. He liked the idea of discovering something hidden, like we were explorers in a world that had already been combed over 1,000,000 times. He showed us the spot on a grainy satellite image, a clearing deep inside Black Pines Forest, farther than any trail markers, past an old fire road that no one used anymore. It looked perfect. Private, quiet, the ideal place to forget about everything waiting for us in the fall. The first time I heard the name Black Pines, I remembered the stories my grandfather used to tell. He grew up in the next county over and claimed the forest was older than any of us knew. He said it had always been a place that took people. I'd laughed it off, of course, but sometimes when he told the stories, his eyes would drift to the window, like he was afraid the trees were listening. On the morning we left, I almost told Darren and Kayla I'd changed my mind, but I didn't. I didn't want to be the scared one. We parked the car where the fire road ended, loaded our packs, and started the hike. The trail was little more than a corridor through the undergrowth, a footpath winding between old mossy stumps and crooked trees that looked like they were bending to watch us pass. Kayla was quiet the whole way. She'd been excited about the trip, but the deeper we went, the more she kept glancing over her shoulder. Every time I asked if she was okay, she gave a tight little nod and said she was fine. But her eyes never stopped moving. We walked for hours. The deeper we went, the stranger everything felt. The light got thinner, like the canopy was choking off the sun. The trees looked wrong. Their trunks were warped and bulbous in places, sprouting twisted knots that resembled faces if you stared long enough. Sometimes the branches looked like they had fingers. I tried not to look too closely. By late afternoon, we reached the clearing. It was almost perfectly circular, maybe 30 feet across. There were no stumps or rocks, just a flat carpet of dark pine needles. At the center stood a single tree half bigger than any of the others, with bark so pale it looked bleached. I remember thinking it looked out of place, like it had grown up in some other forest and wandered here by mistake. Cool, Darren said, setting down his pack. This is perfect. He didn't notice the way Kayla stood there hugging her arms, or the way I couldn't make myself step past the edge of the clearing at first. We set up camp anyway. 2 tents, a fire pit made from stones we gathered around the perimeter. As the sun went down, the shadows stretched toward us, merging into a single darkness at the base of the big white tree. We ate in silence. Even Darren seemed subdued now. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing but the occasional dry rasp of branches scraping against each other. I tried to shake off the feeling. I told myself it was just nerves. We were farther from civilization than we'd ever been. Of course, it felt strange. When the last of the light drained from the sky, we huddled around the fire. Darren told a few stories, but none of us really laughed. Kayla kept staring into the flames, her face hollow in the flickering glow. After a while, she looked up and whispered, "Can you hear it?" "Hear what?" I asked. She didn't answer. Darren forced a laugh. "You're freaking yourself out," he said, but his voice was too thin. "I think we should go back in the morning." Kayla murmured. Nobody argued. It was close to midnight when we turned in. I lay in my sleeping bag, watching the shadows of branches crawl across the tent walls, trying not to think about how it looked like they were reaching for me. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. Then the scratching started. It was so soft, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Just the wind, I told myself. Except there was no wind. I held my breath and listened. The sound moved around the tent, slow and deliberate, like a fingertip tracing a path. I thought about calling out to Darren, but I was afraid of what might answer. After a while, the scratching stopped. I waited, counting seconds in my head until I was sure whatever it was had gone. Then something breathed right behind my ear. I bolted upright, my heart hammering so hard it made me dizzy. My flashlight was clutched in my fist. I clicked it on and unzipped the tent. The clearing was empty. I crept out into the cold. My breath hung in a pale cloud. That was when I noticed the footprints. They were bare, long-toed, sunken deep in the pine needles. They circled the tents over and over, overlapping in spirals. I shone my light toward Darren's tent. The flap was open. Inside, it was empty. No sleeping bag, no pack, nothing. Panic closed my throat. I called for Kayla, and that was when I saw her. She was standing at the base of the white tree, facing it. Her hair hung over her face. Kayla, I yelled. She didn't move. I stumbled toward her. The closer I got, the colder the air felt until it hurt to breathe. Kayla? Kayla. She turned. Her eyes were wide and glassy. Her mouth hung open too far, like her jaw was unhinged. When she spoke, her voice was flat and wrong. Help me. Behind her, something shifted around the base of the tree. I don't have words for what I saw. It was pale, boneless, unfolding itself from the hollow like wet laundry. It lifted an arm, if you could call it that, and pointed at me. I ran. I don't remember how long I ran. The forest blurred around me. Branches clawed at my skin. Eventually I fell. My flashlight skittered into the dark, leaving me blind. I tried to stand, but something cold brushed the back of my neck. I crawled away, gasping. When I finally found the light again, I was somewhere I'd never seen. A hollow had been carved into the earth, ringed with roots like ribs. The walls were slick and pale, glistening in the beam. At the far end was an opening. Inside, everything was black. I heard Darren's voice. Come. It was flat, toneless, but still his. Come. The darkness in the hollow shifted. I backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. From the opening, the thing began to emerge. Its head was smooth, featureless, except for a slit where a mouth should be. Long arms pulled it forward in jerky lurches. It stopped just at the edge of the light and lifted one finger. Shh! I turned and climbed, dirt sliding under my hands. When I reached the lip of the hollow, I looked back. The thing was watching me, head tilted. Stay, it whispered in a voice that sounded like all three of us speaking at once. I ran until my legs gave out. When dawn broke, I was alone in the clearing. No tents, no footprints, no sign of Darren or Kayla. I staggered back to the car. When I finally reached the ranger station, I told them everything. They searched for weeks. They never found a trace. That was 3 years ago. Sometimes I still hear their voices calling me at night. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I'm back in that hollow. And I know one day I'll answer. Hey Reddit, this is my first time posting here. I'm not really sure why I'm writing this. Maybe because I haven't slept right since it happened. Maybe because I need to see it in writing to convince myself I didn't imagine the whole thing. I've spent most of my life camping in Arizona. My dad started taking me out to the mountains and desert when I was about 6. I've always loved the isolation, the quiet, the sense that you could walk for days without seeing another person. I thought I understood the land pretty well, its dangers and its moods. But last weekend, something happened to me that I can't explain. I'm not saying it was supernatural, but if it wasn't, then I don't know what it was. Day 1. I left Phoenix before dawn on Friday. I wanted to beat the heat and reach the trailhead by the time the sun was up. My plan was to spend 3 days out in the Tonto National Forest, hiking a route I'd mapped months before. There are no official trails out there, just a network of old logging roads that fade into washes and game tracks. Exactly the kind of place I love. No traffic, no noise, no cell service. When I turned off the last gravel road, there were no tire tracks ahead of me. That was the first good sign. I parked in the shade of a mesquite tree, pulled on my pack, and set out. The hike-in was perfect. I covered about 9 miles before lunch. I saw a group of mule deer moving through a canyon, a few turkey vultures coasting overhead, nothing unusual. Around noon, I stopped to eat and check my topo map. That's when I noticed how still it was. I mean, really still. Even in the middle of nowhere, you expect a background hum. Flies buzzing, birds calling, lizards rustling in the grass. But the whole canyon felt like someone had pressed a mute button. The only sound was the wind sighing through the rocks. I told myself it was just the time of day, animals resting in the heat, and kept moving. By late afternoon, I reached the ridge I'd picked for my first camp. It had a flat spot under a big juniper tree and a view of the entire wash below. I pitched my tent and started gathering firewood. That was when I heard a voice. Hey! Clear as day. A man's voice, maybe 50 feet away, just behind the boulders. I froze, scanning the rocks. No movement, no silhouette, just empty space. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" Nothing. I walked to the edge of the clearing, heart hammering, and looked around. Still no one. After a while, I went back to camp, telling myself it had to be an echo, some rancher's voice carrying down the canyon. But deep down, it felt different. Too close, too directed. That night, I made a small fire and sat there for hours, listening. Every so often, I thought I heard soft footfalls beyond the glow of the flames, but when I stood up to look, the sound stopped. By midnight, I was too tired to keep watch. I crawled into my tent, zipped it tight, and tried to sleep. Day 2. I woke up before dawn, my mouth dry, every nerve buzzing like I'd had a nightmare I couldn't remember. When I stepped out of the tent, the first thing I saw was footprints. They circled my camp, bare human feet, the toes long and narrow, the arches deep. They weren't mine. I'd worn boots since I left the car. I crouched and touched one of the prints. The edges were soft, like they'd been made hours before. I can't really describe the feeling I had right then. Part of me was terrified, but another part felt this weird certainty, like I'd expected it. I packed up breakfast without eating and set off up the canyon. I decided to hike a big loop to look for any sign of another camper, anything to explain those prints. Around mid-morning, I found an old cattle trail that led up to a rocky promontory. From there, I could see miles of empty land, scrub, rock, scattered trees. I glassed every hollow and ridge with my binoculars, but I never saw another person. I sat there most of the day. Once I caught movement at the edge of the junipers below, a shape that moved differently than the deer I'd seen. It was too tall, almost upright. I focused the binoculars, but whatever it was had already slipped behind the trees. By late afternoon, I felt exposed up there, like something was watching me from below. I hiked back to my camp in a hurry, feeling that crawling sensation between my shoulders. When I got to my site, I stopped dead. My backpack was gone. I found it 30 yards away in the middle of the wash, lying open. All my food wrappers were laid out in a careful row on the sand. My water bladder had been punctured. Nothing was actually missing, just moved, touched. That's when I realized how quiet it was again, even quieter than the day before. I felt this heavy dread settle over me. I rebuilt my fire and sat there, gripping my hatchet, barely blinking. After sunset, the moon came up, huge and bright. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, just outside the circle of light. Then, around 10 p.m., I heard the voice again. "Hey, man." This time, it was my friend Kyle's voice. Kyle and I used to camp together all the time before he moved to Oregon. He hadn't been in Arizona for over a year. "Hey, come over here." It sounded exactly like him, except not. Like someone doing an impression but getting the cadence wrong. I didn't answer. "Come here, I have something to show you." It was closer now, just beyond the firelight. I sat there, staring into the darkness, heart pounding so hard I felt sick. Then the voice changed. It sounded like me. My own voice, warped and hollow. "Nathan." I couldn't move, I couldn't even scream. The fire flickered. For a split second, I thought I saw something standing between the trunks, tall, thin, with arms too long for its body. But when I blinked, it was gone. I didn't sleep at all. I sat there until dawn, gripping my hatchet, listening. Day 3. When the first light came, I packed as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my stove twice. I turned to grab my sleeping bag, and that was when I saw it. Perched on a branch was what looked like a coyote. But its face was wrong. The snout was too short, the eyes too round, too human. Its fur looked like it had been stitched over something else, something that didn't quite fit inside. It didn't move, it just stared at me. Then it stood up. It rose to its feet like a man, joints cracking. The front legs' arms hung low, almost to the knees. I backed away, clutching my pack. It tilted its head. The jaw opened wider than any coyote's ever could. Then it said, in Kyle's voice, "Don't go." I turned and ran. The whole way out, I heard it in the trees behind me, footsteps that matched mine. a low clicking sound like a tongue against teeth. Once it whispered, Nathan. By the time I saw my car, I was sobbing. I didn't stop running until I was inside with the doors locked. I didn't look back. I drove straight toward the nearest town. I pulled into a gas station and sat there for over an hour, trying to convince myself it hadn't happened. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I finally had the nerve, I texted Kyle just to check in. He called me immediately, sounding shaken. He told me he'd had a dream the night before. He said he was in the woods watching me run from something that looked like a coyote wearing a human face. He said it was calling my name in his voice. He hadn't known I was out there. I haven't gone back to get my gear. I don't care if I ever see it again. I know what I saw. People out here call them skinwalkers, things that can steal your voice, your face, your memories. I used to think that was just a story. But if you're ever alone in the desert and you hear your name spoken by something you can't see, don't answer.